Steph, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Andy, thanks so much for having me on. Excited to dive into some great topics today.
Yeah, of course. Just to begin with, can you kick us off and walk us through your career? Tell us kind of like what you've done, where you've been, and just bring us up to speed on where you're at currently, if you can.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to keep it quick, but Stephanie Grubbs, I started out as a college volleyball player many moons ago at West Virginia University. Played volleyball there, and then I kind of smoothly transitioned into being an S&C intern with all the sports. Then I went to the University of Pittsburgh for a quick internship for the summer to get some more experience before I bounced down to Clemson University in South Carolina. I was there for 5 years. I started as an intern, then I did my master's degree there, coaching. Then I went to be an assistant and the assistant director before hopping over to Mississippi State University to be the director of Olympic sports. Was there for 3 years, kind of built the department from the ground up, new weight room, staff, all the sports science, before going up to the University of Pittsburgh again for my second time in a different role as the assistant AD for sports performance. Was there for about 3 years, similar to kind of build out the sports science department, hired our first ever director of sports science, as long as oversee S&C there before I've taken my first professional sports gig. I was a seasonal intern with the Pittsburgh Steelers through like a NFL Women's Forum opportunity. So that was like my first experience just working in pro sports in the NFL. But now working in Major League Baseball, I'm a major league strength and conditioning coach with our head strength coach Wes. So yeah, all things baseball in season, doing it. Super excited.
Quite a lot of quite you managed to package up quite a lot of different experiences there very quickly. So that was very masterful. What does your current role look like, just to sort of give people the lay of the land for what you do now?
Yeah, so working with the Houston Astros, I started in January. So now we're in season. We have usually like 30 games in spring training, along with 162 games for the season. And then hopefully going into postseason, we'll have some additional games there. But right now, I'm working with our head strength coach, Wes, to support him from a sports science initiative and strength conditioning initiative. So we kind of work together day in, day out, training the guys. I travel with the team. We train them at all these different stadiums. It's really nice. There's visiting weight rooms at every single stadium. So everything's outfitted to support us in that regard. We'll travel with some sports science equipment as we see fit. But yeah, just kind of assisting all things with the team, sports science and S&C on the road and at home to make sure we're ready to go.
What was your kind of route into sports science? And the reason I ask is I feel like, and this might be a wide sweeping generalization, but I feel like for me, my observation has always been that in, say, like the UK and Australia, sports science is a really defined role quite often, versus in America, there's not always as many purebred kind of sports science roles. I'm just curious, kind of what was your route into having sort of a sports science role in sport?
Yeah, I would say it started back when I was at Clemson University, and it was kind of around, and clearly everything started over in the UK and Australia, like you had mentioned. Like when I spoke at the ASCA, when I was at Pitt, going over there, I was like, man, I was presenting on how I built out the sports science department, but being in Australia and knowing the lay of the land, I was like, you guys are 10 years ahead, so please give me feedback on my presentation. But when I was at Clemson, I feel as if that's when kind of the rush of sports science was starting to come into college sport. So that was around like 2015, 2016 that we were really starting to bounce some ideas around between myself and the director at the time, Rick Franzblau, of one, we had an opportunity to kind of invest in some different pieces of technology through some donations and just our football program doing really well helped all of our budgets kind of rise, all tides rise together, right? So I would say between Rick and I, it was just a curiosity of we know these different pieces are out there. I always kind of formulate my mind as a practitioner around I'm a problem solver. So we may have a problem with a certain team of maybe we've had 3 injuries in the same site. Like how can we measure? How can we objectify and look at these site specific demands, whether it's a groin or a hamstring or an upper extremity injury, but how can we use the tech to help us collect information to hopefully be data informed as we go into conversations with sport coaches and the other performance team areas. So I'd say It started around that 2015, 2016 era with like Omega Wave, Gym Aware, the Vault piece of equipment, even Hawken with the force plates. We kind of slowly started to dabble. And then I think as we collected all that information early on as a practitioner, we weren't possibly using all of it to really solve problems. At first, we had to figure out like what are KPIs of the sport and what can we use on a day-to-day basis with like a catapult, for example, for planning practice. So I think we went from collecting a whole lot of data, and then as I went to Mississippi State and I was the director of S&C and really trying to onboard sports science, I had been through collecting all the information, and now I can decipher like what do I want to invest in that I know will give us the most bang for our buck when I do have like a very specific budget to work within. What can we use in training day in, day out? Testing is training, like training is testing. So I think just looking at it in that regard. But yeah, that's kind of where it started. And then at Pitt, that was a whole different ball game of it being a little bit more formalized and me being over both S&C and sports science formally, and hiring a director of sports science was really unique.
No, it's really interesting, and I think my observation is always kind of that collegiate sport can sometimes be an easier or maybe better sort of environment to actually try and implement or test out some sports science concepts or new systems, because I think pro sport, depending on the sport, the team, organizationally, it can just be a lot more complicated to say the least. So I think sometimes collegiate sport can be this kind of nice balance between high level sport and maybe the ease or the ability budget wise and culture wise to actually try things out. I think pro sport, you don't want to take as many risks to try new things out, but also it's just harder to do it sometimes and get things over the line. So has that been your experience? I'm not trying to get you to echo chamber my my observations, but just curious if that's reflective of what you've seen.
Yeah, as I gain more perspective on my last role, where I was over like 500 student athletes, and we had the football weight room, a basketball weight room, an Olympic sports weight room. And the one great unifying piece was like force plates, for example. We had the same force plates in all three weight rooms, like same brand. Catapult we kind of used across court sports, field sports. But having such a large sample size and collecting information allowed us to see what's going to have the most impact on a day-to-day basis, and really physically preparing them. That's our job to peak at the right times and getting them ready, whether it's through like for us for spring training, we have that certain amount, like 45 days to get guys ready for the season. But how can we use all this information that we're collecting to best prepare the athletes, whether it is in the college setting or the pro setting? But I think in the pro setting, as I've transitioned, just when you're asking guys to do something, or gals, let's say, like you need to respect their time, because there's only so much time in the day for your professional athletes between interview demands and all the different stresses that they have going on. The stress is a lot higher in our space. So when you're asking them to do something and take 5 or 10 minutes out of their training session, you better make sure it's like worth their time, and we're getting information on the back end that can help them be a better performer. It can't be just like a guinea pig, and maybe in college sports, because everything was so new, we were doing a lot of testing and data collection around, and especially in college sports, you're trying to keep up with the times in recruiting and the arms race. In pro sports, your athletes got there for a reason. They're really good at their craft. So now it's just making sure you're investing a lot of money in these players. You have to make sure they're available. So what can you do from your position to bring value to the organization to help keep those players on the field? So I think it's just again, it goes back to like the why of why I started using sports science. It teaches me how to be a better problem solver.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I've changed my mindset of when I was at Clemson. It was like, oh, let's buy everything we can from a recruiting standpoint. So when recruits come in the door, it's like we have this, we have that.
Yeah.
But now that I've learned more and just become a little bit more seasoned, any piece that I'm going to invest in is hopefully helping solve a problem, not so much just saying we have the tech to have the tech. But
Yeah.
that's my personal journey through sports science. Other people could say different things, which I respect everyone's point of view.
I think you sort of mature with precision, don't you? Sort of it's a really easy decision to do everything and throw the kitchen sink at a problem or a question. It's much harder to sort of hold back, figure out what's the right thing, right time, Is it going to be taken well by the athletes? And get what value you're going to get out of it? I think like I work more as a physio now, but I think whether you're a physio, sports scientist, strength and conditioning coach, if you're a physio, you probably refine certain diagnostic processes. If you're a strength coach, your programs probably get simpler. Maybe if you're a sports scientist, your sort of inclusion of data gets, more refined as well. I think everything just gets simpler with clarity, probably.
Yeah. And I think now, because I went from such a generalist role prior to this, overseeing like 18, 19 different sports, to now specifically working with one. Um, for my job, I'm chasing certain qualities for baseball players. And I've worked with college baseball as well, along with now being professional baseball. But some qualities being like speed and lower body power, another one being rotational power, and then upper extremity testing, like limb specific testing. So I think the framework of how everyone should look at sports science should be around, hey, let's look at these KPIs of the sport for like the actual site specific testing. That may be just like specifically around, hey, we see oblique injuries, we see soft tissue injuries being like a hamstring. What are we gonna do to like test and objectify this information over time to help make really good decisions as a performance team? So I think it should start with those KPIs as like an S&C or sports science practitioners, and then talking with the other performance areas as well of what's important to them, so you guys can all work towards the common goal.
Yeah, well said. You mentioned baseball then, but you've obviously worked in different sports and different roles. In terms of kind of systematizing your S&C and sports science approach to a game or a sport, what has carried over for you during those kind of career transitions?
Yeah, I would say as you come into a new role, and especially when we started like the sports science department at Mississippi State and Pitt, is under promise and over deliver, especially when you see this in nutrition or sports science, you have like one director of sports science for all the teams, so like your ability to perform and land, whether it's reports daily, decision making, whatever it may be. So I think we started with under promise, over deliver, and start small, have proof of concept, and then build out from there. So maybe with volleyball, when we hired our first ever director of sports science at Pitt, let's just start with the force plates and do that really, really well. Okay, we got a lot of small wins with the head sport coach of delivering information for him of like notables week to week. Now he's more interested, more curious, like what can we bring next? Like maybe it's catapult, maybe it's like layering in these different pieces. But I think under promise, over deliver, and then like slowly ease them in versus being like, hey, here's the 1080, here's the gym aware, here's the force plates, here's catapult, like all on day one. I think starting small, showing proof of concept, and then adding in additional pieces is definitely how I found small wins along the way. And you don't like um, let's say you have your head sport coach, you're not going to overwhelm them, because they already have so many other things coming at them that they're trying to do, like get different players on the team, recruit, plan practice. So I think that's what's allowed me to get a lot of wins with sport coaches from a sports science standpoint, and even like the rest of the performance team when you're introducing different pieces to your PT that maybe they've never seen before. Like, hey, maybe let's use the dynamo. You may be using some type of handheld dynamometer from a different company, but like this one could be great because it goes to the cloud and we can track information. We already have the force frame and the Nord board already in there and force tech force plates. I think just having those conversations, and if at the end of the day they still want to stick with what they got, like how can I take that information and organize it for them? So staying curious, asking a lot of questions to other practitioners of what they need in their space. But I think what's allowed me to make transitions, going back to your question, transitions from one position to the next is coming in, and this came from a book that I got recommended from Adam Petway, like the first 90 days, like coming in and just asking a lot of questions. Like, don't come in and think you have the answers to all the problems of the Houston Astros, right? Because I'm new to the organization. I know nothing about what they've kind of been through the last how many years, or my role at Pitt when I took over that leadership role. I think how I approached when I came in at Mississippi State, all guns a blazing, like then thinking I have to put in all my systems and all my processes and hire my people. Um, that's how I maybe approached my first leadership role, and then how I matured and transitioned to my leadership role at Pitt was when I got there. Hey, let me get to know like what are the systems they have in place. what's working, like if that's working, what's not working, let me kind of go towards that. Let me get to know the staff. Oh, wow, there's a lot of great people on the staff. These are their strengths and weaknesses. Like I can put them in positions of power with the different responsibilities of what their strengths are. So I think I matured in how I approached it of like, you don't have to throw everything out when you go into a new role. Get to know the system and the process in the first 30 days and then just see how you can ideally like supplement or be an asset and add on top of that some new ideas um, over time. Because usually there's a lot of good stuff already going on. It's just figuring out what that system is and then how you can raise it up that 10, 20, 30%, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I feel like nothing puts a tail between your legs quicker as well than you go into an organization with the idea and then you've done a bit of work for it. You suggest the idea and then they say, "We've already tried that,"
Yeah.
and you've just wasted your process before that. I'm curious, like it's day 91 onwards, let's call it. Obviously, it's never that simple, but let's say it's day 91 and you want to start trying to get ideas over the line. How do you sort of approach that? Does it start with questions of have you tried this and that tees up your idea? I'm just kind of curious as to do you have like a thought process or a strategy for how you then suggest your ideas and try and bring them into fashion?
Yeah, I think my way of approaching it, and it's changed over time as I've worked with different personalities, different head coaches, different performance staff members, is let's say on day 91 of my new position at Pitt, I was like, if I'm going to a head coach and I've seen something like, hey coach, like, do you have a second to talk? Right. Um, and then hopefully they say yes. And then
Yeah, let's
I'll
assume they say
say,
yeah.
over the last month or so, I've been watching practice and I always start out with some positives, right? Like I've really liked how you ran this or done that, but I've observed like this trend over time. Like, why are you doing that? I'm really curious. I want to learn more about that. And then hear them out of why they're doing something. Like maybe they're running sprints in between drills. And instead of me coming and be like, oh, they're running too much, like that's my job as an S&C practitioner to do the conditioning. Like ask them why they're doing it, get a really good foundational understanding of why they're implementing it or why they've done it the last 10 years and then show your observation of maybe what you've seen at another spot that works really well. You can never go into a room, and I'm sure a lot of people know this, and tell them like, oh, you're doing this all wrong, so that's never going to go well. But I think ask some questions to figure out the lay of the land and figure out that foundational understanding, and then say, hey, I've observed this. Have you tried this? And then I think asking from the get-go, like when you walk in the door, like, hey, are you open to feedback? I think like asking for like, hey, Andy, are you open to feedback on this? And if they say yes, that's already opening the door for like a positive conversation. And you can kind of see how they react in that regard too. 'Cause it's the same thing if they come in my office and they want to ask me like, hey, can I ask you a question? Or would you be open to this like piece of technology? It's like, oh yeah, like I haven't seen that, but like let me look into it and get back to you. Or like maybe I have seen it. So I'm always staying curious. This is what I've heard from an implementation standpoint, like good and bad. Um, so I think approaching it in that way has been super, always framing things as an observation, and not that you're telling them what to do has been super beneficial for me.
Yeah, I really like that. Kind of like almost diplomatically kind of planting the seed and just seeing where they go with it before you go too strong too quick on the idea. And I guess also like if they do have a really strong reaction, it actually gives you more context anyway. Like if the coach for whatever reason goes off on one in a way you weren't expecting, you're just getting more insight into maybe why they think certain things anyway. So yeah, I really like that. That's a really well thought strategy. You obviously wear a sports science hat on top of coaching, as we've kind of mentioned. Can you give us some examples of maybe like systems or processes that have been effective for you when you've been building out a department, just to sort of pull back your former presentation, but bring it to the modern day?
Yeah, so I would say, and I'm always looking for like I found answers to my problems from calling other practitioners in the field, right? So I think whenever people call and ask me questions, I'm like, hey, I don't have the answer right now, but like let me call like Travis Fuentes at Texas, the director of sports science. He's probably seen this problem. I'm curious of how he kind of conquered and found a solution. So, and in our world that we live in right now with Twitter and Instagram and clearly like finding emails pretty easy or cell phone numbers, like make sure you're just reaching out to practitioners in the field or listening to podcasts like this that you can find their Instagram handle and get a hold of them. So that's kind of my rant or my soapbox. But one person that helped me kind of get our sports science department off the ground at Pitt when we were starting from no director of sports science ever was Travis Fuentes and like a John Waggle. He's at Notre Dame now, but Travis Fuentes, I called him and I'm like, hey, you were like the first ever in your role, or you were really starting it from the ground up with like a unique partnership. Like, tell me what you learned in the first year, like what went really well and what did not go well, and hopefully I can learn from maybe your mistakes, just like people have learned from mine. But one thing that he taught me whenever he got hired was they had like a sports science open house, like right from the beginning, and they invited head sport coaches, like different like dietitians, athletic trainers, PTs, like people from the ticket office, people from fundraising, all like your sport ADs. But he was like, hey, this really helped. Like in the presentation, he talked about like even like when a new head sport coach comes into play, right? Like I'm the new head sport coach for the women's basketball team. Let me invite people in to get behind the scene look of like what's my philosophy, what are some of my pillars of what's going to be important to build out this department? How can I support you? How can you support me? But we had this sports science open house and invited everyone from the athletic department, and the turnout was great, actually. And so we went through and we had kind of like our sports science interns hop on the different piece of technology, show them like how it works, how the test goes about, the information we get on the back end, and then different examples of different sports and how they could use it in their space. So I think education is so powerful and bringing the information to them, right? Like, hey, just come up to the weight room. We'll throw the presentation up on the TV, and that's where conversations start, right? And usually after we had that sports science open house, we got emails from different sport coaches because sometimes they want to ask questions in front of everyone. So afterwards, it was like we said coffee and bagels, let's say. We got emails from different sport coaches saying like, I have this problem right now. I feel like we're not very fit. Like what conditioning tests can we do or how could we use catapult that you showed in the presentation? So I think that's where a lot of conversations started through that open house to allow them to see what is sports science, defining it. Because a lot of the sport coaches hadn't been at a place at that time where they had a director of sports science. So like, how can I use this resource? I've never had this before. Or if they're coming from a pro sports setting, maybe they did have like a performance scientist, like we have some with the Astros, like maybe they were exposed to it, but we tried to just implement and educate them along the way of this is how we can help you in your space and solve problems. So I think that really helped us open the door. And then, yeah, we lived off of that under promise, like over deliver piece of like, let's say I can do A, B, C, and D. Year one, let's do this. That went really well. Year two, let's continue to build. And hopefully, with it going really well, get those head sport coaches to advocate for adding another full-time role and so on and so forth. And we kept like a rolling document. Felix Prosser was our director of sports science at that time. When I was there, he's in the MLS now. But we kept a working document of like how many tests we were running for all the different pieces of technology. So let's say like in the past year between women's soccer, men's soccer, volleyball, this, that, like we had 10,000 force plate jumps, on the force frame, we had this many tests on the dynamo, on gym aware, this many reps. So we kind of calculated all that information to show time spent through just like hands-on testing. And then that wasn't even behind the scenes creating reports, like working on the AMS, but kind of logging all that information out. And this was something that came from Travis, showed like, hey, look at this one person trying to do all of this work. And that was a way to advocate for adding more full-time roles to support that position. Because when you're building out a department from scratch, like it takes a lot of momentum, and you have to go to some of these, whether it's front office people for me now or administrators then, to try to like show why this area is creating value for all the different teams, and hopefully they'll want to invest more money and add more positions in it. So that's how I kind of found small wins early on with sports science.
Yeah, I love the open house thing. Like can kind of relate to it a little bit earlier in my career when I worked at University of Bristol back in England, and it was a way more modest collegiate sports setup than you'll be used to in the States. We would do an open house sometimes like once a year at the beginning of the year. It was much less sort of coach driven, but more student athlete driven. But like, each team would have a captain or some kind of more senior student athlete figure. And we would run sort of like an open house so they could become aware of strength and conditioning, rehab, physio, all that kind of stuff. Not all of the teams had kind of like S&C personnel, etc. at the time. And I'm curious as to how it went for you, but I think when people walk through your door because they're curious, they're really motivated and ask all the right questions, and they want to know how you can support them because they're trying to find answers. And I think it's really different to if you're, say, a strength and conditioning coach or sports scientist and you go and observe a practice in terms of how it then builds the relationship with a coach. Because I think like the risk is they might think you're auditing their session versus they're just coming into your room and asking you questions because they're curious. But have you sort of found it's a more like warm and fuzzy way to start the relationship by doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would say, because it's interesting, me kind of wearing two hats throughout my career. Of with strength and conditioning, you will see like a new strength coach comes in. Um, and when you go into a head sport coach's office as the new head strength coach, you may ask, like, historically, I know you've had a lot of different strength coaches throughout your career. Like, tell me what you've liked, tell me what you haven't liked. What testing and assessment have you done? And usually they can formulate like opinions and thought processes around like things that they really liked and things they did not. Like, I don't want my team doing Olympic lifts because so and so hurt their wrist or their back, or we have to do this conditioning test. It's the end all be all. So I think sport coaches have been around S&C practitioners for a very long time. On the flip side, from a sports science standpoint, they really haven't had their mind made up of like what makes the perfect sports scientist. Like in their mind, they may want a certain personality for their strength coach. They may want certain soft and hard skills for the S&C coach if they had so many over time. But on the flip side, from a sports science standpoint, they're still trying to figure out like, well, I had this one sports scientist before that made me like a really cool report, like end of season report on how we did like formulate periodization throughout the season using Catapult and like our top 20 drills that we used and what stress response that elicited on the back end from a high speed running standpoint, cuts and accelerations. But yeah, I think it's kind of an open door policy right now of sports science is new in the States, and sport coaches are starting to have maybe one, two, three, four, and like they're starting to actually understand like what they want in a sports scientist, and that can look different at every university. That's the other thing. Like, do you have a sports scientist that also has their CSCS and can help with like work with the PT for return to play processes and like testing over time? And yeah, so I think the door is a little bit more open to leave your impact as a sports scientist right now on some of these head sport coaches because they haven't had so many over time.
I want
But
to I want to sort of segue to some nitty gritty strength and conditioning topics while you're on.
yeah,
So I want to segue to microdosing. You've obviously you work in baseball now, which I'm sure features microdosing, and I'm sure you've been in other sports along the way where microdosing can work really well. Um, Talk to me about sort of like how your use of it maybe has evolved. Sort of like when did you start trying microdosing out? Maybe as like the route into this conversation.
yeah. Oh man. So I started doing microdosing. I probably first heard about it from Corey Schlesinger when he was at Stanford. So this was like a long time ago. I was at like a Bay sports performance conference in California that Ramsey had put on when he was out there working in the NBA. So I went to that conference, and that was the first time I heard about it. And that was a long time ago. I was at Clemson. That might have been like 2016. It was the first time I heard about it. It was like on the scene. I remember Corey had like some of the staff in there when he was at Stanford, like demonstrating some of the movements he was doing and how he was kind of dosing it into training and basketball. And I was like, man, this is really cool. And that's where my curiosity started to kick in. Like staying curious is like a big why for me. Staying curious, learning, pushing the envelope, trying new things. Usually I try it on myself first before I try it on clearly my athletes. Use myself as a guinea pig. But that was the first time I heard about it. And then when I got to Pitt, I started working at the volleyball program. It was funny. Our head coach Dan Fisher, he is very close friends with the Stanford head volleyball coach, but they had been doing it on a volleyball end along with like Corey and the basketball end. So Coach Fisher had already been curious, been doing it, and I was stepping in to be the new volleyball strength coach. So he was like, hey, tell me what you've seen, tell me what you think will work. Like, we've had a lot of success with it from a player availability standpoint and girls staying healthy and hormonally lifting more frequently throughout the week. Looking at that. But so I started doing it my first year at Pitt, and that was like 2020. And I worked 4 seasons with the volleyball program. We had a lot of success. We made it to 4 Final Fours, and I give that credit to Coach Fisher because I was just kind of coming in. He had already had success before, but we really enjoyed just managing, looking at practice load and then looking at weight room load and fatigue and stress and finding a perfect marriage between all these different things, right? Plus schoolwork, plus making sure recovery, they're taking care of that. But kind of getting to my current role with baseball. So if you're not familiar with Major League Baseball, we do play 162 games throughout the season. So when I was working with volleyball at Pitt, we were like, okay, we laid out the week that Monday was usually our off day. Tuesday was more of our like strength day in the weight rooms. We do high force movements, like a squat. We do our push chain work, like a Nordic. Then following that, we do like a power and accessory work. So maybe it was more concentric work, like a trap or a deadlift. Then the day before game day, it would be like a speed type day. Then we'd play Friday, Sunday volleyball games. And then really that tweener day would be more of like a primer CNS type day. So boom, there we go. That was like the script and the plan for all things volleyball. Easy schedule to manage. Now, as I've gotten to baseball, oh man, and every day is game day. Managing that, I think my brain pivots to with baseball. A lot of people are like, find themselves thinking like, oh, what I can't do all the time. Like it's always like, man, I can't do this, I can't do that. 'Cause we're playing every day, and I always try to pivot my mind to being, what can I do? You know, and coming from this microdosing strength training aspect has been really, really good. And I was already kind of doing some research into game day lifting with volleyball, but for us, it was more managing with us traveling, not having equipment on the road on game day to kind of elicit the same dose response relationship on game day. So we're like, if we can't repeat it all season long on game day, we don't want to mess up people's routines. But with baseball, luckily, every like visiting clubhouse that we go to, we have a visiting weight room, which is awesome. So we're able to elicit that response. So with our schedule and its challenges, as we all know, because you can like look it up, I think for me, in season with baseball, it's really balancing adaptation and fatigue. And what we'll look at is, and you can look at all the MLB schedules, you can Google it online, like who travels the most miles, like going cross country from top to bottom. And you see this in the NBA too. I was just meeting with an NBA strength coach the other day, getting coffee while I was on the road, and just managing that travel and stress and fatigue. That's the biggest thing. I'm looking at adaptations, I'm looking at fatigue, I'm looking at the travel stress, kind of marrying all these different things and seeing what the guys need. It is my job as a performance practitioner. So not every day looks the same, but my big another why is like the best ability is adaptability along with availability. So you have to have plan A, B, C, and D when you're working in baseball. So if a guy comes in and it doesn't feel great, like, okay, this is plan A. How does this look? Like maybe we do an ISO day, like maybe you do this, maybe you do that. So I think my menus have just completely built out from, I had this perfect menu for volleyball because I always knew we played Friday, Sunday, and maybe like in football, we play once a week. So you know exactly what the menu may be. In baseball, I've had to create multiple menus, which has made me just a better practitioner. Just living around that, the best ability is adaptability for me as a practitioner.
Obviously, like with microdosing, it's really effective for like getting this kind of like minimal dose or minimum effective dose that you need for sort of like protective tissue loading, whether it's protective sprinting or, you know, minimal high force outputs, that kind of stuff. How effective have you found it for actually kind of getting gains and getting an actual like new and more progressive adaptation in an athlete? You know, they're in season, let's say. How do you find microdosing has allowed you to still make good enough progress, or do you find it just kind of holds them where they need to be able to play and participate?
Yeah, I think some real pros that I've seen with microdosing is if you think about when you're in season, and maybe I'll think about like men's soccer, for example. I would ask the guys, we maybe lift once a week, right? And it'd be like, hey, I need you guys to come in and lift on Tuesday. It's going to be a 45 to 60-minute lift, extremely long, let's say 10 different exercises. Um, to emotionally ask them to come in and do that, the intent behind every rep for a 45 to 60-minute lift in season, um, I wasn't getting that same integrity and intent behind every rep as when I asked the guys or gals to come in, like, hey, we'd always lift with pit volleyball like right before practice. Instead of me doing the same bland warm up, like on the court, monotonous every single day, just come up and lift with me for 15, 20 minutes. Let's hit 4 to 6 exercises and then go on the court. I've already primed you for exactly what you're going to do. Maybe we're doing a hang clean. That's going to correlate exactly to their vertical jump, their blocking, their swing. So I see it as a more specific prep routine for practice, which has elicited a great response as I've used like force plates tracking over time, seeing that go up over the season and peak towards postseason from a player availability standpoint, and just focus around, like I said with soccer, like instead of asking them for a 60-minute lift, spreading it out 15 to 20 minutes, maybe 3 to 4 times a week had worked out really well. And a lot of time, especially in professional sports, between my time in the NFL and the MLB, these guys are coming in the weight room and doing their prep work already. Maybe they're getting like doing some core exercises, or they know what they need. Like from a rehab standpoint, maybe they tore their ACL in college, and now they know like I must do these 4 exercises before I go out on the field for practice. So a lot of the guys, like I see the weight room as a central hub, wherever you're at, and I'm sure a lot of other people can agree. Like they're always stopping in to do their prep work, so you're just asking them to do a few more loaded exercises to prep them even more for what they're about to see.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, it just depends on what qualities you're chasing throughout your in season. But I've started to pivot my mind of my position being more of like a physical preparation coach,
Yeah.
not just maxing out on lifts in the weight room. You know, especially because the athlete population that I've pivoted to in college, I may have athletes that are 17 to 21. Now I have athletes that are 21 to 35, you know, so it all comes down to the qualities that you're chasing and how you're going about that. But I think from an intent of lift standpoint and exercises, and even like I know a lot of people do wellness questionnaires and things like that. When I'm seeing guys every day before we go out for practice, if they're lifting, let's say like their microdosing sheet is 4 or 5 days, like that's every day I'm having a conversation with them on how they're feeling. You know, you're getting a lot more touch points in season as a S&C or sports scientist, wherever you kind of fall, if you're helping with them in the weight room. So I think that's allowed me to catch things earlier that if we're only lifting once a week and I'm only really spending time with them 1 day a week, and then I'm not seeing them for a following week, like how their body's going to transition and feel, especially when we're playing every day. I think that's been super beneficial as well for me.
I like that you keep using the word intent within that. Um, Obviously, if you're in a sort of more normal training phase, you're not microdosing, you've got more ample time and volume you can use as a stimulus in the weights room with the player. You know, you still want to be intentful in time. You still want to drive intent and be cognizant of sort of how you get the best and the most out of athletes. But when you've got that kind of smaller window of time and smaller volume to play with in your microdosing, is there anything that you do or change in terms of like how you communicate with the athlete to get that better intention so that the microdosing doesn't just become kind of grey work and it's impactful in its small dose?
Yeah, I think this is where maybe some of your training tools come into effect, right? Like using the gym aware for most of their lifts, depending on because we lay out our whole entire season and our training blocks and we show the guys what the plan is ahead of time of like hey, I know we have 18 games in a row here on the schedule without an off day. Like, we're going to do X phase at this time to make sure we're eliciting the right response so your body can recover. Because that's like the highest stress month. Like, when you look at some of these schedules, it's just out of this world, whether it's NBA or NHL or
Yeah.
MLB, just managing the stress and fatigue and trying to make sure they're peaking at the right time is really really a great challenge to have and exciting. But um, I think using some of those training tools, like I love to use the gym aware day in and day out to drive intent, you know, and talk about screen time. Like everyone's on a phone, everyone can connect with looking at an iPad or a cell phone or so I think we use that. We'll try to get them on the force plates once a week, let's say, to look at where they're at in that regard. But I think using some of these training tools to drive intent
Yeah.
only helps elicit, and like you're educating them along the way of like, this is why we're in this training block because we're seeing this in the schedule. So I think just you showing that you have understanding of where they're at that current day and time, and then leaving some wiggle room, right? Like the sets and reps that you put, whether they're doing their workout through a phone or on an iPad or just on a sheet of paper, like, hey, we're gonna do 2 to 3 work sets, depending on where you're at. Like if you're not hitting the speed, we'll drop weight. Or if we know we're not feeling great based off of sleep information or whatever it may be, like we'll only do 2 work sets. Or maybe, like, I think people don't think about this, but on the flip side, you feel really good today, let's push it because we know we don't get these many like days in the bank, you know? So I think not always think about from a sports science standpoint doing less, but also I'm feeling good. Let's push like the intent and the effort and let's go up a little bit. Or yeah, push weight on drop or deadlift or bench or whatever it may be. So I think being able to kind of have this like thermostat almost of like where are you at, and then also like I sometimes think about like a stereo system or a knob of like let's turn it up, or hey, maybe we need to turn it down. And I feel like that works a lot of the time with intensity.
It's a really good way to save your bullets personally as well, in terms of if you can be the kind of quieter coach for a day because you know the gym aware or the force plate is going to objectively drive intent from the athlete. It kind of means that you don't necessarily have to be the coach. Not that you're the screaming rah rah coach, but like you don't have to be the coach in their ear, like using your tone of voice and your volume and your kind of like technical cues to drive that intent. You can kind of hold back a bit and save that for a different day, you know, because if you're always coaching in the same way, they can kind of plateau to your stimulus on them, you know, in a weird way. So it's a good way to sort of pull back and go, the tech will drive that a bit more today. I can turn my dial down.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
love that. Um,
No, I would say too, the one thing that I love with some of the Vault products as well is like with the Nord board or with like the Force frame, I'll do like their last working set on the piece of technology. So it's not just like this is a testing piece of equipment, like I use it as a training tool as well. And that helps lock the guys in or gals in even more. It's like, hey, I'm gonna do my ISO prone pulling instead of I'm just gonna like pull into my hands or like some fixated handles. Like I'm just gonna get on the Nord board and do it and see where I'm at week to week. So I think any type of like instantaneous feedback you can give the athlete creates even more buy-in. And sometimes they don't see these different pieces of technology as like, oh man, this is a test. Like this is always gonna deliver whether I'm gonna do really good or really bad. It's like, no, I'm just hopping on to use it as a training tool. So I think just making it part of their routine allows you to get that instantaneous feedback as well as a practitioner of is what I'm doing working. So you're constantly auditing your program of how I need to change blocks or paces along the way.
you know, we're obviously talking about kind of like how you get what we have just been mentioning, how you get kind of more out of the athletes using these kind of approaches, and when you do them, when you don't. I guess on the sort of opposite end of the spectrum, how do you sort of plan and integrate recovery for this kind of, well, you don't have to talk about the Astros, but like when you have been in sports where you've got a lot of schedule density, how do you then sort of periodize the kind of recovery aspects too?
Yeah, and I would say this was a passion project when I was at Pitt, in a sense of we had gotten a donation towards recovery equipment. And I think the next booming thing, like Alabama, Clemson, like a bunch of these universities have these massive recovery rooms, you know? And one, people are trying to figure out where is recovery housed under? You know, is it housed under medical? Is it housed under sports science? Is it housed under nutrition or health and wellness? So they're trying to figure out like who has ownership of recovery right now, just in the performance space. But for me, myself and our director of sports science, Felix, we were like, we received this donation. They want to put it towards, it really just was around like sleep technology, like an Oura Ring or hyper ice equipment. But this kind of started a further conversation of we were building a new building. Like, let's put in a recovery center or a wellness center in there as well, because a lot of the athletes are kind of seeking it out outside the facility. And we would rather help them, like you're saying, manage and figure out what day is a good day and this, that, and the other in their calendar. So we looked at it in four quadrants, and this is how I kind of best formulate my mind in regards of like organizing frameworks and systems. But I touched on like Oura Ring already, but like the first area or quadrant was just sleep and relaxation. And this could be as simple as like blackout curtains or education around what temperature you should be sleeping at, or supplementation on the road of like a Cherry Bundy or like Som Sleep, which we work with a dietitian on. Or even like shift wave has become really big, whether it's in like the NFL or MLB, of changing and shifting you from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So that was kind of quadrant one of what we saw for recovery and what's important, whether it's like at home or on the road. And that's how it would get tricky, right? Because we travel so much in all these different sports when whether you're in college or professional sports. Um, so we kind of tried to think of different pieces of equipment we could use for either travel or non-travel. Next one was just the normal heat and cold exposure. So whether you like doing contrast, old school, like clearly like you can't get away from like hot tub, cold tub, driving blood flow. A lot of our guys like across NFL and MLB and all the above love the sauna. So like helping them periodize and where do you put like the sauna out? Is it going to help and aid with sleep? That kind of goes back into quadrant one, but heat and cold exposure was another big one for us. Quadrant three, this was more around like the electrical and red light stimulation, which red lights become increasingly more popular in like a newer space. But we use like the chimera tights, like the different wearables, whether it's like the tops, the pants, the pajamas. Because there's the red light beds or like cocoon pods that are out that are super popular. And then this could be like a Mark Pro or Firefly when you're traveling for electrical stimulation. But I think this is more like athlete dependent, I would say, and just like a newer space. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to like look for different research and articles and things like that. So, and then the last one, quadrant four, I just say massage therapy because most teams have a masseuse on staff, but this is just that neural input through the skin. This could be like clearly the foam rolling, Normatec boots, all that old school stuff. But that's how we, like from all the tools that we were already using and then looking at investing in, we kind of split up the four quadrants that way. But I think how we looked at it as like a performance team as we've kind of collaborated, because it's important to tie in your dietitians, your ETs, your PTs, your masseuse. You want to try to measure it like on two scales, right? Like one side or one end of the scale is like athlete perception. So like athletes like red light cocoon, it works for me. It's the best thing ever. Da, 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 da. But then like Suzy Q over here is like, yeah, that does nothing for me. So like just understanding that like one end of the spectrum, maybe just athlete perception for some of these different recovery modalities, but also you want to work with your performance team to find things that are valid and reliable and research backed. So I think we try to, when I was at Pitt, or just like recovery just in general, because I use it for myself when I'm training, you want to hit it in that sweet spot of like things that you're investing in. You want to find like a happy medium in that regard. But it's definitely a booming industry and area and something I'm really interested in. And I'm always trying stuff out on including myself, like I said before, implementing it with the guys or gals. But yeah, I think it's really interesting right now, and I'm always staying curious. So that's the name of the game.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those areas that's just always being innovated anyway, isn't it? Because it kind of spills into the fitness and wellness space, maybe way more so than like, you're not going to walk into a Planet Fitness and see a gym aware anytime soon. But
For sure.
everyone can kind of relate to the auras, the whoops, and all the other different products. So I feel like it's one of those things where sport innovates in that space, but probably also then the non-sporting domain innovates towards the sports direction too. Um,
Definitely,
so
definitely.
you know, in your career, you've had, it sounds like, a string of, you know, good roles that have kind of progressed onwards and upwards through time. Um, is that something that's been very deliberate, or something that you've sort of driven with a certain intention? I'm just curious as to sort of how you've approached your career.
Yeah, man. I would say I've been really lucky to have great mentors. I think as a young practitioner, I always stress when people call me, just asking for feedback on like career moves because I've gotten older and now I'm like, oh man, I've been in the field longer and I've had a lot of interns calling me for advice on things. Like figuring out a personal and professional, like what's important to you and kind of having those lists, but picking mentors that you're going to learn from and be a sponge with, and looking at positions that have really promising projectability. So it's like, hey, I saw so and so, they were in that job before. Let's say the assistant AD spot at Pitt. The guy before me, he went on and took a bigger, badder role, which is great for him. But also that shows that like the person in that position, did they go and take a bigger, badder role, or did they just get out of the field because of burnout or a bad situation or something other? So like doing your homework on positions, but then also, yeah, I've been really lucky to, as I've picked every internship, I've had such great mentors that can give me advice on what to do throughout my career. So mentorship's really important, and that's why I try to do everything I can to like give back me personally to young people. Uh, and for me, like you have to take calculated risks. Like if you talk to anybody in the field, like everyone's taking a job at like full-time job in professional sports, like, oh man, like I'm gonna have to learn a lot of new things. It's gonna make me really uncomfortable. But like I love that. I love a challenge. Like I love the challenge of our schedule. I love the challenge of a new position in pro sports. So um, I think just taking calculated risks, and that's where you got to lean into your mentors to get feedback, and then also have like professionals in the field that you just respect that you can call for like unbiased opinions of like, what do you think about this position? So I think just continuing to network with people that you've not only worked with, but like you respect and see doing good work as well, and try to like at least every month or like when we're traveling, I try to connect with really intelligent professionals to learn from on the road. And then also like a lot of like whether it's microdosing strength training, whether it's meeting different professionals, like invest in yourself, go to conferences, buy books, like get continuing education courses, like pour into yourself. I learned that from like a very young point in my career from Rick Franzblau when I was an intern at Clemson. Like you gotta just stay getting after it from a continuing education standpoint throughout your whole entire career. Like the problems I had um, when I think back to when I was an intern at Clemson of like figuring out and understanding programming, this, that, and the other, but now like problem solving in my current role of like now I'm investing in different continuing education courses to solve the current problems or interests that I have now, and find solutions for my position. So I think, yeah, I can't stress enough about just investing in yourself, and learn everything that you possibly can every single day and staying like diligent and consistent with it over time.
Cool. Do you find that you sort of dive into the technical less now? Is that, are you sort of more into the people and politics and like the sort of softer skills now? Because I feel like when people start their careers, it's all hard skills of like training methodologies and things like that. Has that evolved kind of in that way as you've gone up the ladder?
Oh man, I would say no. I would say yes and no. It just depends on like what problem I'm trying to solve today, you know. And I think in pro sports, it's really interesting because I saw this when I was in the NFL and now MLB. Of you never know what question you're going to get asked from these guys because the athletes that you're training, like clearly college athletes, love them to death, but they're not going to be as intelligent as the guys I'm training now. And like this is their career and livelihood, so we have some really, really smart guys that may come up to me and ask me a question about something like recovery oriented or nutrition or like it could be anything across the map. So I'm constantly trying to stay on the cutting edge of what's out there and what people are doing. So I'm constantly reading about, and maybe some of these like bad things about like, okay, clearly cryotherapy's out there, hyperbaric chambers or this or that. So I think I'm just trying to constantly be on the cutting edge and know like I'm a generalist, but like a guy may ask me a question and I'm gonna go down that rabbit hole to find him an answer right here, right now. So I've really enjoyed working with like a higher level type of athlete that's extremely knowledgeable. That's challenged me to be a better practitioner. So I think that's been really giving in that regard for me.
Yeah, that's spot on. Where's the best place for people to find you? I'm aware it's a game day for you, and I don't want to steal too much of your time. So where can our kind of listener base find you and see what you're up to?
Yeah, I would say Instagram and Twitter is probably the easiest at Coach Steph Mock. I recently got married to my old husband that's also a coach, Ryan Grubbs. So it's still at Coach Steph Mock. Find me there, shoot me a DM, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Cool. Well, Steph, it's been great to chat to you and meet you today, and thank you so much for coming on the show. And yeah, hopefully the game goes well for you guys later.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy, for having me.